The kitchen faucet dripped in steady rhythm as Andy Jackson stood at the window, watching his wife's car pull into the driveway. He'd been doing this for 3 weeks now, counting the seconds between her arrival and the sound of the shower running upstairs. Today, like every other day, it took 47 seconds. Andy was a furniture maker, 34 years old with calloused hands and a mind that worked like the joints he crafted, precise, interlocking, built to last. He'd spent the last 8 years building a life with Wendy Robertson, now Wendy Jackson, a woman whose smile once made him forget every splinter and aching muscle. They'd married young, built their modest home together, and settled into what he thought was contentment. But contentment had fractures now. The shower upstairs roared to life. Andy checked his watch. 47 seconds exactly. She hadn't even called out a greeting. 3 weeks ago, this pattern started. Before that, when he would come home, kiss him, ask about his day, help him clean up the workshop. Now she rushed past like he was furniture himself. That afternoon, while Wendy ran errands, Andy did something he'd never done before. He checked the laundry basket in their bedroom. His hands moved through her work clothes, blouses, slacks, cardigans. Then he found it. A pale blue shirt she'd worn 2 days ago. He brought it to his nose and caught the scent immediately. Not her floral perfume. Something darker. Cedar and tobacco. A man's cologne. Andy's jaw tightened. He knew that scent. It had been in his nose since childhood, at every birthday, every Christmas, every Sunday dinner. His older brother Warren wore it religiously. Had worn it since high school when girls started noticing him instead of Andy. Warren Jackson, the golden child, the successful real estate developer who'd moved back to town 6 months ago after a divorce. 6 months ago, right when Wendy started working late, right when the distance began. Andy spent the next morning in his workshop, hands moving automatically through the motions of sanding a chair leg, while his mind worked through darker calculations. Warren had always been competitive. In sports, in school, in their father's eyes. But this, sleeping with his brother's wife? That was a different species of betrayal. He needed certainty before he acted. Andy was methodical, patient. He'd learned that from his grandfather, a master carpenter who taught him that rushing leads to mistakes, and mistakes in woodwork, or in life, could be catastrophic. That evening, Andy suggested they have dinner at Warren's new house. "He keeps inviting us," Andy said, watching Wendy's reaction. She went pale for just a moment before recovering. "I'm tired, honey. Maybe this weekend." He specifically asked for Thursday. Something about celebrating his new investment property. Andy kept his voice light, casual. "We haven't seen him much since he moved back." Wendy's fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "Okay, Thursday." Thursday arrived with rain. Andy drove them to Warren's renovated Victorian on Maple Street, a house their brother had spent months restoring. Warren answered the door in crisp slacks and a button-down, that cedar tobacco scent rolling off him like a signature. "Little brother." Warren clapped Andy's shoulder, then turned to Wendy. Something passed between them, a flicker of panic, of guilt. Andy saw it clearly. Come in, come in. I've got steaks on the grill." The evening crawled forward with agonizing normalcy. Warren talked about property values and market trends. Wendy barely touched her wine. Andy watched them both, noting how they avoided looking at each other, how Wendy excused herself to the bathroom twice, how Warren's laugh sounded forced. When Andy stepped outside to take a phone call from a client, he doubled back quietly through the side door. He found them in the hallway, Warren's hand on Wendy's arm, both their faces tight with anxiety. "He doesn't know," Wendy whispered. "He can't know." "You're sure?" "Yes. We just need to be careful until." Andy cleared his throat. They sprang apart like teenagers caught behind the gym. "Client wants me to come by tomorrow," he said easily. "Big commission. Dining set for their new place." Relief flooded their faces. They thought he was oblivious. Perfect. Andy knew that patience was his weapon. Over the next 2 weeks, he became a ghost in his own marriage, quietly observing while appearing blissfully unaware. He installed a small GPS tracker on Wendy's car, legal, since they were married and he co-owned the vehicle. The data showed a pattern. 3 afternoons a week, she parked at Warren's house for 2 to 3 hours. But Andy needed more than infidelity. He needed leverage. While organizing receipts for taxes, Andy discovered something interesting in their joint account statements. When he had transferred $10,000 to an account he didn't recognize. When he traced it, The account belonged to a shell company. More digging revealed Warren as a silent partner. His wife wasn't just cheating. She was moving money. Andy called his old friend Mitchell Welsh, an attorney who'd handled his business contracts. Hypothetically, Andy said, if someone was moving marital assets without consent, preparing for divorce, what would that look like? Mitchell's voice turned serious. They'd be establishing hidden accounts, transferring cash, maybe even lowering the apparent value of shared assets, planning to blindside their spouse in court. What? Hypothetically, how would someone protect themselves? Document everything. Preserve evidence. And don't let on that you know. That night, Andy created a hidden folder on his computer. Screenshots of bank transfers. GPS data showing Wendy's car at Warren's house. Photos of texts he'd glimpsed on her phone before she started password protecting it. A recording from the baby monitor they'd optimistically bought last year. He'd left it in the living room, catching Wendy on the phone. Warren, I can't keep lying. After the divorce, we'll have enough to start over. Enough to start over. With his money, his life, while he was left with nothing. Andy's hands clenched into fists, then slowly relaxed. Anger was kindling. He needed a forge. The plan came to him while working on a client's custom table, a piece that required precision joinery, each piece fitting into the next with mathematical exactness. That's what he needed. A design where every element locked into place, where his targets would trap themselves. Andy researched property law, divorce proceedings, fraud statutes. He learned that hiding assets during divorce was illegal, that marital funds used for an affair partner could be recovered. That documentation was everything. He also learned something else. Warren's real estate company was overextended. His brother had been flipping properties aggressively, using risky loans. One bad investment could topple the whole structure. Andy smiled. He could give Warren that bad investment. He called Warren from the workshop. Hey, I've been thinking. That old Riverside warehouse property, the one Dad always talked about buying, it's up for auction next month. We should go in together. Honor the old man's memory. Warren's interest was immediate. That property's been abandoned for years. What are you thinking? Mixed-use development. The city's rezoning that whole district. We could buy it cheap at auction, flip it for triple. Andy let enthusiasm color his voice. I've got $50,000 I can put in. If you match it, we'd have enough for the down payment. Silence. Then, let me run some numbers. But yeah, I'm interested. Of course he was. Warren couldn't resist a deal, especially one that would put him ahead of his little brother once more. Great, Andy said. Let's talk details this weekend. You, me, and Wendy. Make it a family thing. He could practically hear Warren sweating through the phone. The warehouse auction fell on a gray Saturday. Andy had done his homework. The property was worthless, contaminated with asbestos and buried oil tanks. Remediation would cost more than the land was worth. But the auction listing didn't mention that. Andy had made sure by quietly contacting the listing agent and having those reports delayed. Warren showed up with a cashier's check for $50,000. When he stood beside Andy, her hand cold in his. She didn't know Warren had invested. Andy had kept that detail quiet. Good turnout, Warren muttered, eyeing the other bidders. Don't worry, Andy said. Most of them don't know the area like we do. The bidding started at $75,000. Andy and Warren traded nods as they drove the price up, eliminating competitors. At $150, it was just them and one other bidder. Warren's jaw set with determination. He hated losing. $160, Warren called. The other bidder dropped out. Sold. Warren grinned, clapping Andy's shoulder. We did it, little brother. This is going to be huge. When he looked between them, confused. Warren, what? Your husband brought me in on the deal, Warren said. Partnership. 50-50 split. Her face went white. 3 days later, the environmental reports came through. Andy watched Warren's face as his brother read them in the coffee shop they'd agreed to meet at. Asbestos? Oil contamination? Warren's voice rose. These weren't in the listing. They weren't. Andy's surprise was perfectly calibrated. God, Warren, I'm sorry. I thought you'd done your due diligence. You brought me this deal. I brought you an opportunity. I assumed you'd inspect the property. You're the real estate expert, not me. I just make furniture. And he sipped his coffee calmly. How much will remediation cost? Warren's hand shook. $200,000. Maybe more. We're underwater by 100 grand. That's terrible. Andy paused. Although, the way I see it, you're underwater by 100 grand. I'm only in for 50. Warren's eyes narrowed. We're partners. Are we? Because I seem to remember you going behind my back, taking things that belonged to me, making plans without my knowledge. Andy's voice stayed level, but his eyes had gone cold. Did you really think I didn't know, Warren? The color drained from Warren's face. About you and Wendy? The affair? The $10,000 she transferred to your shell company? Andy leaned forward. I've known for weeks. I have GPS data, bank records, recordings. Everything. Warren's mouth opened and closed. Here's what's going to happen, Andy continued. You're going to eat the entire loss on that warehouse. All of it. You'll sell whatever you need to sell to cover the remediation and pay back the loan. If you refuse, I go to your business partners with evidence that you've been using company resources for personal affairs. I also file fraud charges for the money Wendy transferred from our joint account to yours. Andy, I'm not finished. You'll also return that $10,000 by end of business tomorrow, and you'll sign an affidavit admitting to the affair and the financial manipulation. That affidavit stays sealed unless you ever come near my wife again or interfere in my divorce proceedings. Warren slumped in his chair. She said you'd never find out, that you were too stupid, trusting. Andy's smile had no warmth. I trusted you because you were my brother. That was my mistake, but underestimating me was yours. Wendy was packing when Andy arrived home. She'd heard from Warren. He'd called her, panicking, spilling everything. I want a divorce, she said, try to maintain dignity. And I'm entitled to half of everything. Andy set his keys on the counter. Actually, you're not. Adultery affects asset division in this state, especially when combined with fraud. Mitchell Welsh has all the documentation ready. You transferred marital assets to your affair partner. That's illegal. I'll fight you. With what money? Warren's broke. The warehouse deal destroyed him. He's selling his house to cover the debts. Andy opened the refrigerator. Pulling out a beer like this was any normal evening. My attorney estimates you'll be lucky to walk away with your car and whatever you came into the marriage with. Wendy's face crumbled. I loved him. No, you loved the idea of him. Warren always looked better from a distance. Up close, he's just a selfish bastard who'd sleep with his brother's wife. And he took a long drink. You deserved each other, but you don't deserve half my life. She left that night, crying and defeated. 6 months later, Andy stood in his workshop, putting finishing touches on a rocking chair. The divorce had finalized last month. When he got her car and $5,000. Warren sold his Victorian to pay off the warehouse debts and moved 2 states away. His reputation in town destroyed when word leaked about the affair. Andy kept the house, the workshop, and his dignity. Mitchell stopped by with paperwork for a new client commission. You know, the attorney said, most people would have just confronted them. Screamed, fought, made it messy. Andy ran his hand over the chair's smooth armrest. Anger makes you sloppy. I learned that from my grandfather. He used to say the best revenge is a well-made plan. Every piece fitting exactly where it belongs. That warehouse play was brilliant. Risky but brilliant. Not risky. Warren's greed was predictable. He always had to win, had to be better than me. I just gave him the opportunity to beat himself. Andy smiled. The only risk was in doing nothing, in letting them think I was too naive to notice, too weak to fight back. His phone buzzed. A text from a woman named Rachel Hoover, someone he'd met at a woodworking exhibition last month. She was asking if he'd like to grab dinner Saturday. Andy replied yes. He'd spent enough time building things that fell apart. Now it was time to build something that would last.